It's the final round of the 2021 Intelligent Money British GT Championship, and we're back to tradition now, the Donington decider. After the 2020 campaign came to a close at Silverstone, we're back to the traditional home of what is always a really tense, really exciting couple of hours of racing to wrap up the various British GT Championships. It is a fairly mild, if overcast day today for qualifying ahead of this all-important race. 4 qualifying sessions coming your way over the next hour or so that will set the grid in both GT3 and GT4 for the 2-hour championship decider tomorrow afternoon. Grid positions are important. It may be a long race, but with success penalties and race strategies to play out tomorrow, starting as high up that competitive grid as you can is always a good start to the weekend. Andy McEwan up here in the commentary box, delighted to be joined, reunited with Joe Osborne here for the final round of the championship. Joe, it's been a while since we had you here at one of these British GT rounds. It's been an interesting year, hasn't it? And as always seems to be the case, we get to Donington Park with still questions to be answered, still championships to be decided. Looking good for Barwell Motorsport, but hey, anything can happen.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen anything happening before in terms of Donington Park deciders and Barwell. So I pray for Mark Lemmer that his curse is finally worn off and they can have an easy run tomorrow. But really highlights the importance of qualifying. We're seeing these GT3 cars year on year get faster and faster. And the negative, unfortunately, from that as a driver's perspective, the driving then leads to the overtaking becoming harder just because of the aerodynamic wake. So this qualifying session is super critical to make your day easier and more successful tomorrow.
That being said, we were at a circuit about a month or so ago that is traditionally almost impossible to overtake at in a GT car, that being Alton Park, and it produced a pair of absolute thrillers. The second race was wet. You almost expect that to be exciting, but that first race at Alton last time was one of the best we've seen for quite some time, wasn't it? It goes to sort of highlight the competitive nature of this championship. There are multiple teams out there that are capable and willing to take the fight to the others and go for the race wins.
Yeah, as much as I say overtaking is hard, it's obviously not impossible, and I think we see year on year the balance of performance, the tool that the organisers use to keep these Lamborghinis, Porsches, Ferraris and McLarens all competitive, getting closer and closer, and that leads to more overtaking because the cars are obviously closer on track when their lap times are closer. So we always see Donington as a mega racetrack. There's some big stops towards the end of the lap into the chicane, the Melbourne hairpin and the last corner, and the bigger the braking zone, the bigger the opportunity to overtake. As we saw earlier in the year, the bigger the opportunity to have carnage as well. So we've got plenty of options of what sort of race we've got on tomorrow.
Yes, the car you were just seeing there was involved in a little bit of that carnage back here in the summer. The number 63 Barwell Motorsport Lamborghini, Dennis Lind and Leo Machitsky, they were non-finishers that day, their only non-finish of the season, but they bounced back brilliantly with a race victory at Spa, a podium at Snetterton, another win last time at Alton Park, and so car number 63 is your championship leader arriving here at Donington Park. But there are 5 teams in GT3 that could still take the crown. The 63 car has the advantage. They are 18.5 points clear of Ram Racing's number 6 Mercedes of Yelmer Berman and Ian Loggy, the pink and black Mercedes that also took a race victory at Snetterton a couple of rounds ago. Then the number 1 Lamborghini that you can see at the front of the picture, shared by Sandy Mitchell and Adam Ballon, they are also in contention. They're actually 4th in the championship, though, behind the WPI Motorsport Lamborghini number 18 of Phil Keane and Michael Igo. And the 5th team still in contention, they may be 33.5 points back, but Beechdean AMR could still wrap up the title. Andrew Howard going it alone, essentially. Johnny Adam had to miss the Spa round, so he's not in contention. He'll be driving alongside Andrew to try and win Andrew another British GT title. 5 teams, 3 different makes of car, Joe, and a circuit that in its own way sort of suits all 3 of them. So it is really wide open in a way.
Yeah, definitely. I think what the biggest consideration to think about really is the pit stop penalties. And that's, again, in the 63's favour. They are penalty free. So the Ram car has 10 seconds extra in the pit stop tomorrow as well. So those guys are going to obviously need pace. But I think realistically, the Ram guys need a safety car in the pit window or afterwards Yelmer gets in. So for me, those 2 are the big protagonists, and I think we're going to see some interesting team tactics potentially across the grid as well. So interesting to see how the cars are setting up for qualifying. You can see the Nick Jones Porsche already on the deck. Its tyres already on. A lot of the teams like to wait as long as they can not to lose any temperature They release the car and the green flag's gone. So the positive is Nick Jones is going to have the clearest track for now. Obviously, cars don't have to leave straight away. So in about 90 seconds, as Nick Jones comes back past, he may have guys on their out lap. And that's really the hard bit as a driver. You have a best made plan that gets torn up and thrown in the fire straight away as soon as the green flag goes. So we don't have a huge amount of cars. We've got like 10 GT3s, I believe, at the moment. So we've got enough space out there for everyone to get it. Whether everyone cooperates, is another matter.
So if you are new to British GT, or you've not at least seen one of our qualifying sessions in the past, then here is what is about to happen. The green flag has flown on the first of 4 qualifying sessions, each of them 10 minutes in length. There are 2 for GT3 and then 2 for the GT4 cars. Each driver within each team has a session to themselves, essentially. So this is session 1. It is for driver 1, for the most part the slower or the AM driver within the GT3 category. They go out, they've got 10 minutes to set a lap time. Their quickest lap time is then added to the quickest lap time of the second driver in qualifying session number 2. So it is the combined time that will set the grid. It's all well and good going fastest in one of those sessions, but if you're languishing down at the back end of the top 10 in the other, you're unlikely to find yourself on pole position. Once we've done that for GT3, we then have another 2 qualifying sessions, again of 10 minutes in length each, for the GT4 category. And again, same format. You combine the fastest laps from each session, and that gives you the grid. And I love this way of doing it, Joe, because it really does put all of the pressure on both of the drivers equally. It's not just the job of the pro, for example, to go out there and set a really quick lap time. Both drivers have to be on it.
Yeah, I remember doing British GT back in the day when it was all about me as the pro, and it was lovely. You got 3 sets of new tyres, but the guy paying for the bills didn't feel particularly special. So British GT have done a mega job at realising what they need to do to keep the AM drivers happy, and they've adjusted the rules accordingly. We're seeing everybody out on new tyres, which is the norm. The new tyres around here is probably worth a second to a second and a half in lap time. It's whether teams have got another set of tyres ready for their AMs. Obviously only 10 minutes, so only going to let you to have 2 flying laps on each set, but with that drop-off being so extreme, that combined time suddenly is so important to how you start the race tomorrow. Yeah,
we believe, Joe was telling me earlier on, that some of the teams have been able to carry over a fresh set of tyres from Alton Park last time out. The teams are always allowed to do this, but because the second race at Alton Park a month or so ago was very, very wet, that means they've got a completely fresh set of slick tyres they're able to bring over to Donington Park. When they choose to use that, though, is up to them. Right then, Joe, we're on board here with Michael Igo. He's done his first sort of banker lap. Now he's got a bit of heat into the tyres, though. Talk us around a lap of Donington Park.
So through the corner curves, onto the brakes to the old hairpin. Not quite sure why it's called a hairpin, because it's a fast corner. 4th gear for the Lamborghini there. 140 kilometres an hour apex speed. Super bright lights on the rev counter there, so you can see blue is his upshift, and as he goes down, those lights brighten up his horizon. Coming up to Coppice, it's a super fast corner, blind entry, so soft brake down 1 gear, in all over the curb, pick the throttle up, and the corner goes on and on. It looks like he's got a little bit of understeer, so the front end of the car hasn't got quite enough grip, in my opinion. Braking for the chicane just over this crest here. Now down 2 gears, 3rd gear, wallop the curb on the left. Track limit's really contentious here on the right. Actually went and stood there myself in free practice to work out what the rule was, and it looks like British GT have got a good handle on it there. Big brake into the Melbourne hairpin. 1st gear, rotate the car, full throttle, hard on the power. Traction control in these cars is superior, so it means you can just get all 600 horsepower down and the car sorts it out. Last corner, get it in early, bit more camber on the inside, hook the curb up, straighten the wheel, and if you think it's a good lap, don't bother going to the left, it's a longer distance, and he crosses the line now. 27.7, decent lap. I think that's going to be right in the mix around pole. My prediction was a 27.5, so let's see what else is about. But he had 2 purple sectors in 2 and 3, so he's looking good, I think. And it looks like he's just lost his lap time to track limits, I'm seeing on the timing screen, so I'm just getting confirmation of that. But at the moment, that lap has been chalked off, which looks difficult. It looked close at the chicane, but I wouldn't be able to say he was definitely off the track there.
Turn 4, apparently, so that was the old hairpin, I think, where the lap time's been deleted. So he exceeded track limits, be that on the inside or the outside of the old hairpin. And so unfortunately, that lap, as exciting as it was to watch on board, didn't really count for anything. It is, though, a Lamborghini on with the provisional fastest time so far. That of Leo Machitsky, the championship leader then, on much better form, it seems, today than they were last time we came to Donington Park, when that car qualified right towards the back, although they also have now had a lap time deleted for exceeding track limits at turn 10, and that, I think, is the chicane. That puts Ian Loggy in the Ram Racing Mercedes to the top of the times with a 1:28.9. He's beaten, though, by Nick Jones in the Team Parker Racing Porsche. Across the line goes Andrew Howard, and only 6th fastest. So lap times being deleted left, right and centre, not what Machitsky needs. The last thing Barwell wants is for this car to be mired back in the midfield again at the start of the race.
Yeah, and the thing that really hurts, it's their first flying lap, which is when the tyre's at its best. So as a driver, you know you've lost that lap, and now you've got to try and replicate. As we see Machitsky lose it into the gravel. I think he'll just get it going. It looks like it dug in now. I thought he was going to release the brake and get out the back of it. That's definitely going to be a red flag, and with the time remaining, it needs to be a quick red flag if he hasn't got a lap on the board. And the other thing is you have to do 2 time laps in qualifying, and that was his 2nd lap. So the clock stopped, there's 4 minutes, an out lap means there's going to be 1 minute 45 remaining as we go the outboard of it. Turns in, looks okay at the moment. He's a little wide, he wants to be next to that tyre stand. You see the car actually load up in between the left and the right, and there's a huge dip in the road there, and it really bumps the car down, and you can see the damping struggle with that load, and it basically bucks Leo off to the left, and he was pretty much a passenger in that, which sounds surprising considering he's in the driver's seat, but that was a nasty little ride for Leo there.
So I was doing the maths ahead of this final round and working out exactly what that team needed to do to wrap up the championship. That wasn't it. What they needed to do was have a clean qualifying session, not stick it in the gravel trap, because he hasn't set a lap time. And Joe, will he be allowed to continue in the session? I don't think he will he?
No, once you've caused the red, you are the legitimate cause of it. That is your session done. So they are recording a 0, basically. So doesn't matter what Dennis Lind does now. If another car doesn't get a 0, they're last. There's no way around it. So I think if I was Barwell now, it would be on the fly strategy. I would send Lind out on these tyres that Leo's just gone off on. One, to check that they're not too flat spotted and they can be used, but then also just save Dennis's new tyres for the race, because they're going to need that. Leo's going to need to start on a new set, and then Dennis in the pits to have any hope of being somewhere near the sharp end to make that championship theirs.
So, championship leaders, 18.5 points to the good. I very much had the feeling that if they were going to lose the championship this weekend, it would be because they lost it rather than others taking it away from them. Now, I'm not saying they've lost it already, but certainly not a good start to their weekend. The championship leading car likely to start from the back. And Joe, if you cast your mind back to the last time we were at Donington Park, as I just said, that car qualified deep in the field, and when there was contact at the front of the pack at Redgate, Leo came driving in, had nowhere to go, and was out on the spot. Now, I'm not saying the same thing will happen again, but that's got to be playing on their minds now.
Yeah, 100%. He was deep in the field, now he's deep in the gravel, so it's rocked a hard place there. It's awful. There's going to be a lot of man management there from Barwell with Leo in terms of how to play it. You've got, at the moment, Ian Stinton 1 place in front. It's his first British GT race of the year. So, yeah, bad luck kind of attracts more bad luck, and that is a huge, huge problem at the moment. And I think it's made worse by almost Igo squeezing in that last lap just before the red flag fell. So he's now on pole. Loggy's in 4th, so his main championship rivals are at the other end of the grid to where he's going to be.
Yes, although, of course, it is the combined times between this session and the next that set the grid. So at the moment, WPI Motorsport are fastest, but they're far from guaranteed the pole position. They are, though, nearly 0.8 of a second quicker than Morgan Tilbrook, as we see the replay here of what happened to Machitsky. Turns in, and as Joe said, he hits that first curb, it unsettles the car, and then he lands really awkwardly on the second one, and around it goes. The mid-engine cars can sometimes be a bit snappy. He locks it down. He did everything right from this point onwards, just couldn't stop the car going into the gravel, and unfortunately, a low-slung GT3 car does not make a particularly good rallycross car, and it gets immediately beached, and you can see it's now being recovered by the hard-working marshals. Joe mentioned there Ian Stinton making his first appearance in the championship. There are a couple of new additions to the grid, both within GT3 and GT4. We'll try and cover them all if we can during the qualifying session, but that Ian Stinton car that he shares with Jordan Witt is particularly interesting because it's Tolman Motorsport making a very welcome return to the championship. We last saw them running GT4 McLarens, of course, a couple of years ago to much success. This time, though, they're out there driving a Bentley Continental GT3, a second Bentley on the grid. It is just a race-by-race entry just here for this final round. But, Joe, great to have a name like Tolman back in the championship. Yeah,
brilliant team I raced with for 2 years in the championship. So, super top team. They've done a lot of hard work behind the scenes there. Chris Tolman runs a super steady ship, very professional, and obviously managed to get Bentley inboard with them as well is a good thing to have. You see the gravel spewing out the back of that Lamborghini. I think there'll be other things spewing out of Leo Maciski as he gets back to the pits as well. So looks like we should be back to green relatively soon. The hard-working marshals have got the gravel clear, and we are green already, so the clock starts straight away. Minute and a half for the outlap. So the first guys are definitely going to get 2 flyers. It's then, if you're leaving any later, as Leo goes straight out the pit lane. So, I mean, I like reading regulations because I'm a geek, and I'm pretty sure that since I've started motorsport, if you cause the red in a qualifying session, then you are out, you are done. Maybe they're going to go get a lap in and argue it afterwards, but I don't think, and I think they can do that.
Okay, well, we're going to see if we can get a further update on that as to whether there is anything in the regulations forbidding them from going out. I have to say, I do agree with Joe. I seem to recall this happening to somebody else earlier on this year, and they weren't entitled to go out. If, though, he is able to set another lap time, that could be pivotal in the championship. You can see him still weaving around, trying to get some heat back in the tyres, trying to get rid of any last bits of gravel that may still be lingering. The gravel gets absolutely everywhere within a car, in the brakes, in the bodywork, in the cooling vents. Got to try and get it all out of there, and he will have time then to at least set a few lap times. Whether they count towards anything, we'll get back to you on that. In the meantime, there is the Tolman Motorsport Bentley then of Ian Stinton. That car has not got going again in the session, although it does, Joe, look like it's moved from its pit box. Yeah,
I saw it crawl down the pit lane under its own power, then kind of spluttered to a stop. So hopefully it's one of those just turn it off, restart it and go again moments. It's gravel still coming out of that car. Leo backing off there to find space rather than an issue, I believe. So yeah, I mean, Leo's got to get his head together and go, and that is so difficult as a pro, but let alone an amateur. Next time he goes through the chicane, all he's going to be thinking is about, last time I was here, I was going backwards at 100 miles an hour. So watching him from the outboard, line looks good, late on the brakes, get it into the apex, just nibble the curb here. Let's just check track limits on the outside, fully legal, so there's no problems there. Unfortunately, got another 11 corners to do to get his lap time registered. Car looking super fast through the Craner curves, easy flat on new tyres, under the brakes, in. This is where we think Igo lost his lap time on the exit again. Looks okay, just the rule is that you cannot have a full wheel over the curb. So any of that green stuff is lava. You're not allowed to touch it. Same again here, out of McLean's. Track limit's super hard, and maybe from the outside it seems easy. Just don't drive off the track, then you don't have a problem. The unfortunate nature is the wider you go, the more speed you carry, the faster you go. So it is literally trying to play Russian roulette with the race director with what is allowed. His first sector's good, only 700ths off the fastest so far. Let's see if he can continue. He's lost 8/10 in sector 2. So at the moment, this could be enough for P3, which, considering he was in the gravel less than 2 or 3 minutes ago, this would be a good result for Leo.
Others are improving, though. We're getting personal best sectors for Calvin Fletcher in the Bentley, for Mia Fluid in the number 21 McLaren, though. So I think we will see times tumble as they go on to what will be the final lap of the session. That's the next lap for the likes of Leo Maciski. Nick Jones just up the road from him. In fact, Calvin Fletcher comes across the line now to go 4th. So the Paddock Motorsport Bentley just 4/1000ths of a second slower than Nick Jones in the Porsche. What can Maciski do? He goes 3rd fastest. Leo Maciski, the championship leader, onto the second row of the grid provisionally in this first part of qualifying session. It will all depend on, well, A, what this lap is for Maciski, and then, of course, what Dennis Lynn can do after. The Tolman Bentley is out on track, but not going very quickly, so they unfortunately are not going to improve on their lap time. Ian Stinton crawling down the hill with some sort of a mechanical problem. I couldn't tell you what it is, though, and they're about to get well and truly in the way of Mia Fluid. Maciski beaten to 3rd by Morgan Tilbrook now, who goes 2nd fastest. Still, though, nearly 7/10 slower than this man. Michael Igo coming out of the final corner. Can he improve then as he goes on to his final lap of the session? No, he can't, but a 27.8 is still only a 10th or so, Joe, away from what he did before.
Yeah, really well, considering we've gone through a red flag period. The tyres would have cooled down and inherently gone through a bit of a heat cycle, which always hardens the rubber, thus losing a bit of grip. So everybody now is on their last lap. The last guy to get through was Richard Neary. So Igo's got one opportunity here, and he's taken it. He's gone purple in sector 1, so fastest out of everybody. Loggy is also purple, but only 100th slower. So as we can see, Loggy coming out, and Loggy's now just got to keep it nice and tight. If he can be in front of Tilbrook, then I think it's going to be a fair fight between Jelmer Berman, Loggy's pro, and Phil Keane, Igo's pro. And I think they're going to be within a tenth of each other as well after our free practice sessions we saw. Track limit's all good, dropped 4 tenths in the middle sector, so this is looking hard, like it's going to be really going to be a similar time to Tilbrook, a 28.3 I reckon. Goes in way too deep there. That's half a second, 6 tenths of a second all day long lost.
Yeah, that was a very aggressive but very scrappy run through the Melbourne hairpin. We are getting personal best sectors though from pretty much everybody, so expect the times to change here. Tilbrook has seen the checkered flag and did improve actually to just 3.5 tenths behind Igo, so he almost halved that deficit. That's important for when Marcus Clutton jumps into that Enduro Motorsport McLaren in a moment. Igo is pretty much on or around his previous best lap time though. What's he going to do then? Michael Igo across the start finish line. Is it an improvement? Yes, it is, fractionally. A 27.700 means he's 0.373 of a second quicker than Tilbrook second. Loggy third. Richard Neary goes second. That's a bit more like it. Richard, remember, came from 10th on the grid back in the summer here at Donington Park to be second coming out of the first corner. If he could start second tomorrow, I think he'd be pretty happy with that. I go fastest then, Richard Neary second, and this man, Morgan Tilbrook, I would say the most improved driver of the season. When he started the season, remember, the first time we saw him live was crashing on the warm-up lap at Brands Hatch. These days, Joe, he's regularly in the top 3 in these AM qualifying sessions.
Yep, he's really good. Obviously, in the McLaren, I get to spend a bit more time with him. I was talking this morning about his 0 moment there at Brands Hatch as he lobbed it into the barrier on the warm-up lap, which is relatively impressive, even by sort of a new amateur's standard. And I did say I think they're on for a super good result here. If they're off the podium, it will be because there's been a mistake or an issue, because both him and Marcus Clutton in practice have been so quick. We're seeing a lap time deleted, so Igo lost his 6th lap, which wasn't his fastest, even though on the time screen it's saying lap 3, but it was his last lap of 6, wasn't it? So it doesn't actually matter. He's either going to be on 10th by 2.5 tenths or 2 tenths. So at the moment it doesn't matter. Obviously when Phil Keane gets in it, that half a tenth may be crucial. So you see the guys just cruising back to the pit lane. They'll be trying to cool the brakes. Very hard on the brakes here at Donington with the stops at the end of the lap. If you attack the pit entry as hard as you can, the brake temperatures are through the roof, 700, 750 degrees. And as you're sat there in the pit lane, all of that energy transfers into the fluid of the braking system, and then the next driver has a very long and soft pedal. And one, it's a horrible feeling as a driver when you've got no brakes, but also the performance element isn't particularly pleasurable either.
Confirmation then of the result from part 1 of GT3 qualifying here. It is WPR Motorsports. Michael Igo 1/4 of a second quicker than Richard Neary in the Team ABBA Racing Mercedes. Morgan Tilbrook puts a McLaren 3rd quickest for Enduro Motorsport, ahead of another one of our championship contenders. In fact, 2 of them together. Ian Lockie 4th for Ram Racing, Adam Ballant 5th for Barwell. Calvin Fletcher's Bentley is 6th, ahead of Liam Machitsky 7th. We'll get you confirmation of exactly what that means a little bit later on. Nick Jones 8th fastest, Andrew Howard down in 9th. That's a bit of a disappointment, ahead of Mia Fluitt, who came through in 10th fastest in the session. And of course we saw a couple of issues towards the end of the session there for Ian Stintons. He is slowest in the session, just behind Stuart Proctor at the tail end of the order. So that's part 1. We will now add those lap times to whatever lap times can be done by the second drivers. These are now the quicker drivers getting into these cars, so we'll get the pros essentially jumping in now. So that 21 car at the front of the queue, that is Ewan Hankey in the Team Rocket RJM McLaren 720S. Then Johnny Adam behind him in the Beach Dean Aston Martin. We're going to get Dennis Lind into number 63, Sandy Mitchell, the reigning champion, into the number 1 car, Jelmer Berman into that Ram Racing car, and the WPI car, the last of those championship contending cars, that will be Phil Keane, who probably doesn't have actually the best memories of Donington deciders over the years, does he, Phil Keane? But coming into it this time with Michael Igo as a bit of an outsider, do you think that maybe suits Phil a little bit better?
Yeah, definitely from a pressure perspective, but Phil's not the kind of guy who's crumbled under pressure. It's the luck that's made him crumble. Yeah. And obviously as a driver, that's never your fault. You always blame previous lives that you've been a bad person. So I think Phil's probably realistic about it. It's a long shot here, and those guys just want to probably win at the end of the year, because when you're looking at doing your next season planning, it's always easier to force the amateur driver into doing more if the last race was a win, and that's kind of tainted their view on maybe was a bad season in places. But Yeah, I think this is going to be tight. I think my prediction for pole is going to be a 25.8. So track's very quick today, and by that I mean the lap time it's producing is fast. It's obviously a non-live object as a track, but the temperature is a huge thing. The cooler it is, the more grip the surface produces, and also the engines produce more power with the denser air. So I think we're looking at a super fastest ever lap time around here for a GT3 car, which is exciting.
Yes, well, the fastest lap we've had so far today was actually set by Marcus Clutton back in the second free practice session at 1:26.4, so we expect him to be strong. Second fastest lap of the day set by Dennis Lindo, and that was only 7/1000ths of a second slower. So there goes the WPI Lamborghini, just getting out ahead of the McLaren. That was a little bit tight in the pit lane, but I'm sure once they get out onto the circuit, they will be able to give each other a little bit of space. Certainly less of a hurry here to get out on track than there was in the first part of the session. And again, I think that's just because these are generally seen as the pro drivers. They just don't take quite as long to get up to speed. Give them 1 or 2 flying laps, they should be able to extract the maximum.
Yeah, 100%. If you haven't done your lap by lap 2, then you've had some problems because the tyre drop off, like I was saying, around here we're experiencing 1 to 1.5 seconds in those first 2 laps. And as a pro, you should be getting your lap time metronomically within a 10th or 2 of your ultimate. So yeah, we're seeing a bit of bunch in there. It looks like Johnny Adams managed to get past Ewan Hankey actually, because Ewan was first on pit exit. Ewan obviously not doing the full season with Mia Fluid in the RJM winning team car, so maybe wants a bit of a benchmark, and who better to have than Johnny Adam as your sight down the barrel of the gun.
Here we go then. There is Johnny Adam turning into the right-hander at Redgate Corner. Second on the all-time race wins list in the British GT Championship is Johnny Adam, 3 behind Phil Keane. He'd like to redress that if he can here this weekend. He's had plenty of success here as Johnny over the years, but amazingly, he and Andrew Howard yet to win a race in 2021. So this is going to be a really important weekend for them to try and get a race win if they can. It's rare that these two go through an entire championship campaign without actually winning a race. So, yeah, they'll be really gunning for that here in the final round of the championship. On your screens then you can see the times that have been set. That should start to be updated with the combined times. So it is that order that you see in the timing tower that should be your GT3 grid in about 7.5 minutes time.
Yeah, we've seen obviously lots of purple sectors now on the first lap. It's always interesting to see who keeps the first sector for the longest. And it looks like Lewis Proctor's done an amazing job. 19.1, that's the quickest sector one I've seen all weekend. And it looks like at the moment Johnny Adams holding on to second sector. It looks like Lewis Proctor's got that one as well. So at the moment, my money would all be on Lewis Proctor here to be on pole after the first lap. Yelmer Berman, Sandy Mitchell were late leaving the pits. You can actually see Yelmer just starting his first lap as Johnny Adam finishes his first. So let's see as we get across. 26.9 is not going to be enough for pole. So let's see how quickly these times tumble.
Yes, so Beach Team then at the top at the moment, but as we said, we do expect more improvements. Hankey second, Plowman takes the Bentley up into third, but is then beaten by Sam Neary in the Team ABBA racing car. Marcus Clutton here, though, he was purple in the first sector. He's within a 10th in the middle sector of the pace set by Lewis Proctor, who is fastest at the moment in the session. He's done a 1:26.7. We expect at least another half a second out of that before the end of the session. Enduro Motorsports, though, they come out of the Melbourne hairpin, and Marcus Clutton looking to try and get this car onto pole position. He's been quick all weekend long, comes out of the Goddard's hairpin. Really tricky corner. You can see how steeply downhill it is. Easy to understeer wide. The McLaren hooks up well, though. Comes across the start-finish line, and the benchmark now is a 26.297. Fastest lap of the weekend. Marcus Clutton goes to provisional pole. Amazing.
I think that car's got more pace, and I'm basing that on how it looks out of the slow speed. You can see the car kind of lurching side to side. So the tyre is cambered, so it's leant over to its inside edge. And I think the inside edge was hot, but I don't think the outside was at optimal temperature. Hence you could see that movement. So I think his lap 2 is going to be even better, and he backs me up with a purple sector 2, which is nice. I was 50-50 if he's going to go faster or slow, but I'm claiming all the credit.
I said he got to provisional pole. He's fastest in this session, still though nearly 3/10 slower than the WPI Lamborghini, which, as you can see, Phil Keane, his second fastest lap time in this session is enough to put them at the top of the combined times. There is Phil down into the chicane. He's 71,000ths of a second slower than Clutton in this session. The commitment through the chicane from Phil Keane, the difference between Phil driving through there and Michael Igo, for example, in the last session, as quick as Michael was going, the commitment from these pros is something else, isn't it? And Phil Keane absolutely throwing this WPI car around. purple, Joe, in that middle sector.
Yeah, really committed. Using the curb on the right-hand side in the brake zone, not something we see that often at Donington. The curb's a serrated surface, so by definition you lose grip when you're on the air part of it. As we see him across the line, goes provisional pole, 2/10, not quite in the 25s here. Clutton coming now. Is it going to be close? It's going to be 6,000ths of a second, so very close. Let's keep an eye on their sectors on this third flyer. This is going to be hard, I think, to improve. As we see, Sandy Mitchell is on 2 greens and is very close to purple in both. So this is what I'd call a sort of a under the radar lap. No purples, but they're personal best and very, very close to purple. So if he hooks up this last corner, opens it up, looks like it had a little bit of a buck, that car again, like we saw with Leo Machiski in it. And he crossed the line, doesn't improve enough, 0.3 of a second.
Yeah, so Dennis Lind puts that car 6th fastest on combined times, whilst Sandy Mitchell is 4th. So at the moment, the championship leading Barwell car is set to line up behind pretty much all of the other championship rivals. They're ahead of the Beach Dean Aston Martin, but the other 3 cars with which they're contending for the championship at the moment would start ahead of car number 63. So it's WPI on provisional pole with 3.5 minutes to go. Enduro Motorsport second. This car, still, I'm glad to see, running in its stealth livery after it had a lot of repair work done after that nasty crash at Spa in the middle part of the year. Sam Neary for Team Aber Racing. He is currently down in 8th fastest in this session, but that is still good enough for 3rd on the grid. Now, this is a car, Joe, I would expect to improve further in this session. So Sam Neary is on a lap which is personal best in Sector 1, tracking maybe to move this car even further up the grid.
Yeah, he's slightly lower than potentially he should be because he's lost a lap time to track limits that we've obviously missed. So he is on a personal best anyway. And for sure, the Mercedes is the car that looks after its tyre the most, is the marketing way of looking at it. Engineering-wise, it doesn't work its tyre hard enough, so it takes too long to come in. So it depends if you're trying to sell one or belittle it. But it looks like a tidy lap so far, and it really is make or break in this last sector. As we saw with Loggy in the AM session, it's so easy to outbrake yourself there. When you're looking to lose 130, 140 kilometres an hour, 1 or 2 metres too late on the brakes translates to missing the apex by 1 or 2 metres. So you need to be on the limit, but not over it. Looks like he's gone in a little bit deep there. It's a really late apex line. That's almost what I'd call a wet line there. It's going to give him a good exit, but there's not that much of a run to the finish line. So 26.6 moves him up to 8th. So yeah, let's see if he can hang on. He's got time for 2 more laps. Scott Malvern looks like he's setting up a lap, so he's obviously backed off, potentially bringing the tyres back down. They obviously go hotter as you use them more, and you want them back in the window, just clearing a bit of a space in front of him so he doesn't get caught up. He'll probably go for a late apex here as well, obviously to throw himself onto a flying lap and give himself the most speed over the line.
Dennis Lind, by the way, set a personal best lap last time around and briefly moved ahead of the number 6 Mercedes on combined times. He almost wipes out the tyre stack there going into the chicane. That was a really aggressive run from Lind. He was briefly 5th fastest on combined times, but Jelmer Berman then improved as well and got back ahead of him. Bit of damage there to the front of that Lamborghini. Now, that's not from the Machitsky spin, is it? So he has made contact with someone or something, probably that tyre stack down at the chicane. Yeah,
definitely. It looks like by a long way as well. It's like a 1.5 foot of rubber on his headlight there. Luckily for him, he's kept his dive plane, the little carbon flick you can see just about 30 centimetres off the floor, and that creates a lot of downforce, really sweeps out aggressively into pit exit, sorry. It looks like he was going into the pit entry the way he was, and he's really going for it. He knows that he needs to find these extra couple of tenths to get that car that little bit higher.
Yeah, so on combined times, Joe, he is 33 thousandths behind the number 6 car, which is then 1/10 of a second behind the number 1. So a 10.5 for Dennis Lind could make the difference between 6th and 4th place and ahead of 2 of his closest championship rivals. It's a really, really important lap, this. There, meanwhile, is the Team Parker Racing Porsche. Scott Malvern, 7th quickest on combined times. He is 6th fastest in the session. And is he cruising into the pit lane or maybe just gearing up for one last go?
Yeah, it's a horrible thing as a driver. You've set a lap up thinking I can improve, and then you're just staring at the delta on your dash, which is telling if you're faster or slower, and it feels better, but the tyres have dropped off and you're half a second down. So he's obviously realised that these tyres aren't needed for the race, so he might as well go for one last push. And you'll just try something as a driver. You'll hit a curb that you don't think works in the vain hope that it finds you a few tenths of a second.
Lind personal best in Sector 1, but the second sector is not a PB. Still quick though, a 33.7 is not bad at all in that middle sector. Only needs to find a fraction though, and it could make a huge, huge difference for this car's championship prospects. Across the line, he will see the checkered flag. Can he move up from 6th? No, the car number 63 stays 6th on the grid provisionally after that spin for Leo Machitsky in session 1, after the contact with the tyre stack in session 2 for Dennis Lind. It's not been an easy afternoon for Barwell Motorsports championship leading car, but they've come out mid-grid behind their championship rivals, but at least they're not right at the back.
Yeah, Yelmer Berman there didn't really catch much of his session, but P3 for him, which is a really good run, and only half a tenth off pole. So the first 4 are covered within 600ths of a second. That is one of the closest qualifyings I've ever seen, let alone at a championship decider where it's going to get really interesting. So the pros all doing their job, and it makes a pretty interesting starting order.
It does, and well spotted that, Joe, because that improvement from Berman moves them ahead of the number 1 Barwell Lamborghini. They were originally sandwiched between the two. That's an extra place on the grid, and it puts them again ahead of one of their championship rivals. So the number 6 car looking good. Strongest of them all, though, is one of the real outsiders for the championship. WPI Motorsport then provisionally will be on that pole position for tomorrow's Donington decider, with Phil Keane and Michael Igoe combining for a time that was just over 3.5 tenths quicker than in Enduro Motorsport, number 77, Marcus Clutton and Morgan Tilbrook, with a really strong qualifying effort from each of those. And Team Aber Racing should come out in 3rd place. And Joe, that's interesting because you've got championship contender on pole, 2 cars immediately behind that don't care one bit about the championship. They just want, in Enduro's case, their first ever win in the championship. How does that affect the championship sort of, the championship situation going into that, particularly the race start tomorrow?
Yeah, it depends on which drivers are around which other drivers. Have they had previous experience, be it positive or negative? And then it will really be, obviously, on track, the car's attitude. So you're going to see Morgan Tilbrook being super fired up, being very aggressive. And by that, you don't have to physically hit people. It does help, but all the time. But just how you position the car into corners. If you're showing the front of your car, it's really that intent of, I want to come past and I'm going to hit you if you do it again.
Well, here then is provisionally your grid for the GT3 part of the Donington decider here in the Intelligent Money British GT Championship. It is WPI Motorsport with a much-needed and timely pole position alongside Enduro Motorsport's number 77 McLaren. Team Aber Racing will line up 3rd, the Nearies, ahead of Ram Racing's Yelmer Berman and Ian Loggy. Barwell Motorsport's reigning championship-winning car number 1 will start 5th, whilst the current points leaders, Dennis Lind and Leo Machitsky, have to go for the championship from 6th on the grid. Team Parker Racing 7th, 8th place for the Rocket RJM McLaren, 9th place for the number 7 Aston Martin, so Johnny Adam and Andrew Howard making life an awful lot more difficult for them. The Paddock Motorsport Bentley rounding out the top 10. An entertaining pair of qualifying sessions then in the GT3 element here at Donington Park, which started off with an intriguing session number 1 for, in general, the AM drivers within the championship. The main story in that first session was a spin for championship leader Leo Machitsky into the gravel. It brought out a red flag. He was able to get back out there and set a lap time, though, and that could prove to be really, really significant. Right then, Joe, that was quite good fun. Now we move into GT4, where I'm very relieved to say we don't have to do quite as much maths, because the GT4 Championship, for the first time in a number of years, in fact it was 2015 the last time this happened, GT4 title wrapped up. It's a done deal. Century Motorsports number 57 squad, who have, let's be honest, dominated the season, wrapped the title up with a race win last time out at Alton Park as well. It means the championship is not on the line. There is still the small matter of 2nd place and also the GT4 Pro-Am Championship to be wrapped up, but a word, Joe, on Century Motorsport. What a turnaround. After a disastrous 2020, they've been almost impossible to beat this year. Yeah,
really have, and I think turnaround's the right phrase, and I think there's obviously key elements there. Nathan Freak, the team owner of Century, super fast driver in his own right, has obviously realised, right, last year was hard, we need to regroup, change some engineering staff, bring some new drivers in, and then BMW on top of that released an Evo kit, which is basically they realise the car has some weaknesses, they address it and sell you some new parts at a high price to make yourself go faster, and it's obviously worked. So I think there'll be a huge amount of various elements that have all added to it, but I think probably that Evo kit from BMW has really hit the sweet spot.
So Will Burns and Gus Burton then provisionally are your GT4 champions, 3 times winners. They've had 6 podium finishes from the 8 races so far this year, and they won last time we were here at Donington Park, although admittedly they did so after most of the GT4 field crashed out, and also having not had to carry a success penalty. This time they have a 20-second success penalty to carry into the race. For second place, though, it's very tight. 6.5 points separate the Team Rocket, RJ and McLaren. We just saw one of them in the pit lane. It's the number 2 car, though, Jordan Collard and James Kell, that is second in the championship. 6.5 points ahead of Andrew Gordon-Colebrook and Chris Solkeld in the second Century BMW, car number 9. And then fourth in the championship is this one, car number 27, Darren Turner and Matt Topham. They didn't race at Brands Hatch. They had a non-finish here at Donington Park. They didn't score points in the first race at Snetterton or the second race at Alton Park. And yet they still come here with a realistic shot at second place in the GT4 title, because, Joe, when this team have avoided trouble, they have been very quick, haven't they?
Yeah, that was all very doom and gloom, your facts and stats there. I don't want to be part of their team. But yeah, it's obviously a bit of a win it or bin it season for them. It's Matt's first year racing at this level. Newbridge have been around, but not for a while in British GT, and obviously then Darren Turner, with all his experience, is probably trying to pick that team up and sort of guide them along a course. You can see they've got a fresh bumper on. You see it doesn't match the livery. That was with contact with the Tolman Bentley, actually, in free practice too. So they obviously do like crashing, and that's kept up all the way through practice. Matt's come on loads and loads, and I think, again, those guys are a bit like sort of Enduro McLaren and GT3. They've really got nothing to lose and are super fast. So I think they're going to be up there for tomorrow.
Nothing to lose in a way. However, they are leading the Pro-Am element of the GT4 Championship by 14.5 points over the Fox Motorsport McLaren. Now, Pro-Am Championship, they'd rather be winning the overall GT4 title, of course, but now that that's sort of off the table, is that going to be their focus, do you think, or are they just going to be gunning for the race win, and if they happen to get Pro-Am, then fantastic? Yeah,
I'd say so. The overall is what they were aiming for at the start here. The Pro-Am kind of is just a bit of a support trophy at the end of the season, and obviously the Pro-Am points are directly linked to where you finish overall, so you can kind of have both attitudes and still get the best out of it, would be my approach to attack the race tomorrow.
4 teams, incidentally, could still win the GT4 Pro-Am then. Newbridge Motorsport, I mentioned. Fox Motorsport's Nick Halstead and Jamie Stanley are 14.5 points behind them. Third fastest, Charlie Robertson and Mark Sansom for Assetto Motorsport in the Ginetta, and John Ferguson in the Toyota. So that's going to be another interesting one to watch in the race tomorrow. Right, lap time starting to come through then. Richard Williams fastest at the moment in the Stella Audi, number 42. There is the number 2, though, of Jordan Collard. So this is the car that currently sits second place in the GT4 Championship. They're a silver combo, of course, so second place in the Silver Cup looks as though it's going to go their way, and they're fastest at the moment in this session. GT4 McLaren then, we've seen that the GT3 cars can go pretty well around here. Is this a circuit well suited to the GT4 as well?
Yeah, definitely. A couple of years racing it myself with Tolman that I alluded to earlier. We had some mega results here, a few wins and poles along the way. The McLaren is that slightly older generation of car now. It's still super competitive. It's just that bit heavier. It takes a lot more elements from the road car, which makes it a cost-effective race car, but not quite as light as the Toyota we're seeing. So this final sector, which I said about being hard on brakes, really shows that. So over a lap, not a problem at all, but as a driver, you really have to manage it over a stint, as we see John Ferguson driving like he's in a Massey Ferguson there, super wide, and really saw the front axle bounce in there. I think so obviously the Toyota likes being quite high at the front. That must be the droop it likes when it attacks the brakes. You see it dive down and transfer all that weight onto the front axle to help with the understeer, but that thing is looser than some things that I've gone out with in the past.
Yes, it is rather, isn't it? Spectacular to watch, and they don't half hammer it over the curbs as well. He is joined once again, John Ferguson, by Jamie Caroline for this final round. Jamie paired up with him at Alton Park last time out as well, was immediately on the pace, but it is the car that moves around the most by far of any of the GT4s, and you look at it out on track and you think, well, that can't be going very quickly, because usually sideways and in mid-air is not the fastest way of getting around a racetrack, and yet somehow they seem to extract decent pace out of it. At the moment, that car 7th fastest, but we do expect more out of it in the near future, with still just under half of the session to go then. It's the Audi fastest, it's Jordan Collard second, it's the Ford Mustang in third, Will Moore in the number 61 car, got that team's first win of the year back at Snetterton in the wet a bit earlier on. Then it is the number 3 Rocket RJ and McLaren fourth, and then Jack Brown in the number 90 McLaren 5th fastest at the moment. So a few of those that we were sort of tipping to be at the front of the field, certainly those that are challenging for good positions in the championship, with the exception of the number 2 car perhaps, struggling a little bit in the early stages of this session to extract that sort of performance.
Yeah, definitely, and I think, see Jamie standing on the graphic, but I'm pretty sure that will be his teammate, Nick Halstead,
It is, yeah.
in it. So Nick has done super well in getting on it with a British GT. He's actually got the best Twitter handle I've ever seen. It is NIK, Nick. He must obviously must work in the tech world, and knew Twitter was going to be cool before it was. I'm not sure it's cool, isn't Twitter? It's the only one that keeps working. But yeah, Nick's come on brilliantly, and I think he's looking ahead for next year, potentially up into the GT3 class. And it's a bit derogatory that we say up to the GT3. Like you alluded to, the cars move around so much in GT4 because they are heavier, they have less aero, so they're more physical to drive. And honestly, as a driver, I don't have a preference. GT3 is faster, feels cool, makes a loud noise, but GT4 is harder and more rewarding in that way. So it's a bit yin and yang, considering they're a racing car. You can't believe how different something can be. They are really, really different. And I think the GT4 provides so much great racing, and I think tomorrow we're going to be flicking a lot back here to see what's going on.
Yes, we certainly were in the summer, weren't we? There was a lot of action in the GT4 ranks here at Donington Park. Out of Redgate Corner then goes the Ginetta. Mark Sansom down in 12th place. He did just move ahead of Nick Halstead, though, in the number 40 McLaren, but towards the tail end of the field, getting a few personal best sectors coming in. Jack Brown actually just jumped up into 4th place, and Will Burns makes his first appearance inside the top 5. They've got a new livery on that 57 BMW to celebrate their championship victory last time out at Alton Park. And Will Burns has taken that car to 5th position, but a bit like we saw in the first GT3 session, there's a bit of a gulf, isn't there, between the fastest car and everybody else. There is just over 4 tenths between Richard Williams' fastest and Jordan Collard's second, and then the next 6 tenths takes you all the way down to about 8th place. So really, really strong effort that from Williams.
Yeah, I think it can be that 2-lap hit you've got on the tyre. If you don't get the max from it, the tyre drops off that much. You can't do anything about it. So it could be that Richards just managed to get the most out of it, and everyone else has left. It's only a tenth or two at 2 corners, and suddenly you are half a second off your ultimate, and it is difficult to do it. You push too hard, you overdrive, you underdrive, you lose as much time. Perfect down the middle is rather difficult, and yeah, you don't do it every time, and you come up with all these excuses, and everyone stops listening to you. So you have to perform every now and again, and you'd say Richard Williams has done that. He's pitted, he's done his time, he's done his flying laps, and he's saving those tyres.
Harry Hayek jumps up into 7th. What can Sansom do? Green in the 2nd sector, but the 1st and last sectors weren't much of an improvement, and so he stays down in 12th place, an improvement in time, but not in position. We switch back now then to another one of those Rocket RJM McLarens. You can see the sun really starting to shine in the driver's eyes now as they come down through those Craner curves. Such a spectacular sequence of corners to watch from trackside, and I can only imagine how much fun this circuit is to drive in a high-performance supercar, essentially. These GT4 cars moving around through the corners. Corners which you really have to carry good momentum through, don't you? Especially in a GT4 car, you don't have that power to rely on when you come off the turn, and Donington is such a momentum circuit.
Yeah, definitely, and like you alluded to, the lack of power really forces you to come off the brake and carry that little bit too much speed in, hope the car grips at that point, and then you get on the gas and get out of there. If you overslow it 2 or 3 kilometers an hour, that is dead speed. That is speed you're never ever going to see in your life again, and the delta time just falls away from you, and you'd rather just go home and call it a day.
Michael Ben-Yaya, 2nd fastest now. That was a late improvement there, so he's got the number 3 McLaren into P2, and then his teammate Jordan Collard just under 2 tenths behind him. So McLarens are indeed looking strong, not quite on the pace of the Audi at the moment, but now less than a quarter of a second between the top 2. And Ben-Yaya, although he doesn't improve on his 1st sector, on what will now be his final lap, he is fastest through the speed traps, and McLaren good through the corners, and a decent engine under the hood as well. Across the line comes Halstead. He will stay 14th though, so the number 40 car, which is competing for this GT4 Pro-Am title, slowest of the GT4 cars in this first part of qualifying, but again, we will combine the lap times, so we'll wait and see what happens in the second session. Remember, the very rapid Jamie Stanley will jump into that car afterwards. Right, what can Ben Yaya do? He's not improving on this lap, but the car really does look good. Bouncing up the front suspension, really a bit stiffer than the rear. The front wheels bouncing up in the air as he goes through the chicane, hits the brakes down into the hairpin. I don't think he's going to improve on this occasion, but this is just about the fastest we've seen from Michael, certainly in the last few races.
Yeah, one of the drivers on the McLaren driver development program, so McLaren have bought him in-house, so we see potential in McEwan. They get a full season of British GT, fully paid and supported, so it's now their time to shine. And obviously Michael's just been improving step by step, and that's really culminated in this last qualifying session. I think he'll be happy with that P2 overall, just in front of Jordan Collard, another former driver of the DDP in a McLaren. So yeah, it's been a pretty interesting qualifying. As you alluded to, the biggest gap is first to second, then everyone's within a tenth. Each tenth is a position, so that alludes like it should be a pretty tight race tomorrow. And
just to illustrate the point there, John Ferguson moving up to 9th position, just, what was that, about a couple of tenths quicker. If I know, he's just had that lap time disallowed. He did briefly move a few hundredths ahead of Matt Topham, but track limits strike once again, and so that car loses its time. There is the 57 car then, Will Burns and Gus Burton. It was Burns that was in the car there. Burton will get in for the second stint. Rather snazzy gold livery adorning the Century Motorsport BMW, and they are able to come here to Donington Park without any of those final round nerves that championship leaders tend to have in this championship, knowing they can just go out there and have fun, but still, of course, try and get that race victory. So it is the number 42 Audi, fastest in part one of the qualifying session for GT4. We've got one more 10-minute session to go. Do not go anywhere, because that will be really important in deciding the GT4 grid. Then a pair of McLarens behind, Ben Yaya and Collard. Wilmore fourth, and fifth fastest for Will Burns. Any real surprises there for you? I mean, Chris Salkel maybe a bit further down than you might have expected, and I kind of thought the Ginetta might go a bit better here.
Yeah, with the flowing nature, the Ginetta with its lack of power, that lighter car, really should suit the first two sectors here, especially. But when you see two cars within 700ths, that kind of alludes to the car being more of the issue than a driver. That's an excuse that either of those two can use on my behalf. But yeah, I think you're right with that. I think you see the Pro-Am cars all behind the silver cars, because that is the Am versus a silver, so that's all relatively normal. So Matt Topham coming out on top, I didn't mean that one, in the Pro-Am element. And I think that's going to be sort of the story tomorrow in stint one. And obviously after the pits, the pros get in those Pro-Am, normally gold rated versus the silvers that are in front of them. The silvers carry more weight, have a longer pit stop, and then suddenly everything's thrown back into the mix again, and it kicks off again, which is always fun.
We've had that a few times this year, haven't we, where it really changes after the pit stop. Stellar Motorsport then fastest in part one, ahead of the two Team Rocket RJ and McLaren's. Academy Motorsports Mustang is fourth, ahead of Century Motorsports Championship winning number 57. Then it's the third of the Rocket RJN cars, the number 4 car in sixth. Century's second BMW is seventh. Balf Motorsport number 98. Fastest, 9th for Newbridge Motorsport, and 10th there for John Ferguson in the Toyota, despite that late improvement, the lap time subsequently being disallowed. Then it's the Century Motorsport Aston Martin, number 71, which we haven't mentioned yet, but that is the David Holloway Bradley Ellis car, two names that will be familiar to fans of British GT, and Century running an Aston Martin there as a third car this weekend. Asseto's Ginetta only 12th. Another new car then for this weekend is the CWS Ginetta, which is down there in 13th fastest. That is Colin White and Mike Simpson. Mike, we've seen racing before. Colin White, of course, a Ginetta racer in the G55s for a number of years now, making his, I believe, British GT debut. And Fox Motorsports, Nick Halstead, slowest of the lot. Always nice, Joe, to see new teams arriving at the end of the year. We touched on this with Tolman with the Bentley in GT3, but in GT4 especially, I think there are quite a few teams that are really seeing GT4 as a valuable place to be in the future, and always nice to get some new teams. I mean, CW Racing, Colin White's team, we've never seen racing in the championship before, so really, really nice to get some new names and new faces in the championship. We'll get on to that second part of qualifying in a moment as we see some of the highlights here from the first part of GT4 qualifying. And after a pretty rapid start to the session for some teams, in particular the number 42 car, the middle part was then a little bit quieter before a couple of really late improvements came in. John Ferguson was throwing the Toyota around as he always does, and the number 3 McLaren was looking particularly rapid. Michael Ben-Yaya on top form here at the end of the season. Fastest though in the first part of qualifying was the Richard Williams Stella Motorsport Audi. I think that's a slightly new livery on the Audi for this weekend, and that car which will now be in the hands of Senan Fielding at the front of the queue here, Joe, for the second part of qualifying. Right then, predictions. What do we think? Can the Audi hang on to pole position? I mean, Senan is no slouch, is he?
Yeah, Senan's super driver. Raced against him a few times out in China, actually. Lovely lad as well. So I think it's going to be a clean sweep for Audi. I think he's going to be on pole, and I think it's obviously then a combined pole. Even my bad math, I think if you're in pole in both, you probably should be up there. And then I think it looks tight with the RJ and McLaren's, to be honest, with the Collard car with Kell in it now versus the Ben-Yaya car with Alan Volante, the German, in it. It's going to be super, super tight. And I think, as we saw, with only 1/10 of a second between so many cars, you've only got to make a slight difference, and suddenly you're 3 or 4 places higher than if you just make that little mistake and you're the other way.
And that is the joy of this combined qualifying format, because, as you said, if one of the drivers, if your first driver can find another 10th on their lap, that's 1/10 less that the second driver then has to find to gain some extra positions in the session. Some of those that were late in at the end of the first part of qualifying are unsurprisingly later out here for part 2. Tyre changes going on for most of them as well. There is Darren Turner, your current GT4 Pro-Am Championship leader for Newbridge Motorsport. Darren finally got his first ever British GT race victory back at the Silverstone 500 as well. Actually, not a bad race to win. They made their debut, having missed the opening round at Brands Hatch, and Darren Turner, a real class act, isn't he? I mean, he's been there, he's done everything. He's raced touring cars, GT cars, had successful careers in both, and a great asset for the championship.
Yeah, definitely. And Darren generally has helped me a lot over my career through no reason or rhyme to help it. He's one of the good guys, and when you look at his CV, any kid would jump at the opportunity to replicate what he's got. And it's wicked to see him in British GT. He's won everything else, so why can't he come here and race in our little championship and have a good time? And doing a great work for Aston Martin, obviously. Knows Matt Topham well, and then what a great partner to be given in Darren Turner. So we flick to Senan Fielding, going through sector 1, obviously going purple, and that's 4/10 quicker than the previous purple sector in quali 1. So looking like he's probably going to be 1.2, 1.3 seconds quicker straight away, and it's looking tight already. He's got a great open space in front, which as a driver is the most important thing. As soon as you get traffic, there's a seed of doubt in your mind that they're not going to get out of the way, they're going to hold you up, and everything you've achieved in life is wasted. So the car rides the curb beautifully. You see it hit the curb at the top of Coppice, and the body stays completely flat, and the wheels just go up into the arch. So the damping looks good. It's given a little bit of a toe to that Mustang, but size difference wise, I think that's probably only worth about 5%. That Mustang is massive. Track limits look fine for the Audi and the Mustang. Hard there, there's not a sensor. All the other corners there's a sensor. Turn 10, that right hand chicane, it's all done by an eye. I went and spoke to the marshal there earlier to see this rule. Goes in really deep Fielding. He's got to get a good exit to make that line work, and it looks like to me the Mustang has caught the gap up. So my money would be on the Mustang setting a faster lap time than the Audi on this first time by Matt Cowley. Done a mega job all year, we know he's quick. So yeah, I'd say his next lap's going to be compromised, if anything, if that gap continues as they come across the line. Yeah, half a second difference. So yeah, that gap's smaller than half a second. So Cowley's got a difficult decision to make. Does he back out of this lap, or does he try and lunge past the Audi?
On combined times, though, the Audi holds on to pole position, look, by 11 1/1000ths of a second over the Mustang. So although Cowley was quicker on that lap, the job done by Richard Williams in part 1 of qualifying at the moment, enough to keep the Audi ahead, but only just. Matt Cowley pushing on here in the Ford Mustang down through the hill. The fastest GT4 time of the day so far, set by Jamie Caroline in free practice, a 1:34.453. Fastest lap in this session at the moment is a 34.8, so we expect maybe a bit more time to be found. Speak of the devil, here is Jamie Caroline, purple in the first sector, fancy that, and he's about to come through to the end of sector 2, and guess what, he's purple again. So Caroline here, I think, about to go to the top. However, John Ferguson was only 10th fastest in his session, and that was a little bit scrappy through the chicane.
Yeah, it's obviously track limits when mud gets kicked up, but it's not really police there because it's not an advantage to do that. I think he was right on the limit for turn 10, that right-hander I was talking about, so just keep an eye to see if he does lose his lap. Again, he's going to get held up, I think, the next lap by that McLaren. There's a few cars out there that haven't done a good enough job for me in managing that gap. Your whole out lap, you get to get your gap, and there's no excuse not to have enough room to get 3 flying laps in completely unimpeded. He was lucky that Jamie Stanley got out of the way. I would have been a lot harsher to him.
Well, he did get out of the way just after Jamie Caroline had set the fastest GT4 lap time of the day at 1:34.253, 5.5 tenths quicker than anyone in this session, and good enough to put that car at the moment 4th on the grid. Alan Vallant there goes 2nd fastest on combined times then, and knocks the Academy Mustang down onto the 2nd row at the moment, but we've still got just under half the session to go. Gus Burton, by the way, along with James Kell, numbers 57 and 2, already getting lap times disallowed for exceeding track limits at that chicane. No news yet, though, of Jamie Caroline doing so, so it looks like he just about got away with it. Yeah,
normally the track limit is done within 30 seconds, and he's well past that now, so he obviously just got the benefit of the doubt, which he will be feeling very lucky about, because he looks like he's backed off on this lap already. So if he had lost that lap, that would have been probably half a second, 6 tenths that he was never going to be able to replicate again. As we go looking at Alan Vallant, he's currently 4th in his session. Again, all very tight. His sector 1's a little bit down. He's got a good clear track, so let's see what his sector 2 is. The sector ends just at the end of this straight as they hit the brakes there. And again, it's a little bit down, so he's probably looking at slowing it down in the last sector, saving the brakes, saving the tyres, managing that gap to the car in front, and he'll look to go again. He's definitely got time for 2 flyers, possibly 3.
So on combined times, the number 3 McLaren just over a quarter of a second off pole position. So that's the sort of gap that Vallant's going to have to try and find. Ain't going to be easy to do, though, against someone like Sennan Fielding, who is actually 14 thousandths of a second quicker than him within this individual session. Yet again, though, in this session at least, first to second, over half a second. The next half a second takes you all the way down to 8th place, with thousandths of a second separating each and every one of those cars in the back end of the top 10. It is incredibly tight. Gus Burton, 2nd fastest in the session there with a purple final sector, so the number 57 car jumps into 2nd place in this session and 4th place on the grid. Another place lost then from the Toyota, and Gus Burton, it took him a while to warm up, but he's now got that BMW really singing and could yet improve again.
Yeah, exactly, and same for Charlie Robertson. 2 green sectors, so it's taken that car 7 minutes to come alive, but this looks like it could move him up a few places as well, and that's obviously very interesting for the Pro-Am element of the grid. He's going to come across the line, half a tenth will move him up 2 places, and he doesn't improve. Oh, no, he does, sorry. There's a real nice dramatic pause on the timing there. He goes up to 2nd overall, still half a second, so that half a second you said about is still the gap to P1, but then there are 6 cars all crammed in that next half a second. Super interesting. Again, that to me looks like track limits at turn 10, so let's keep an eye on that, and maybe in qualifying the marshal there as being a little bit more sympathetic to the driver's cause.
Well, they pinged Jamie Stanley because he's had a lap time disallowed there. So too had Jamie Caroline, although that was down at the old hairpin. And we'll wait and see if anything happens with the 57. There you can see confirmation of those 2 that I just mentioned. The 57 of Gus Burton, who is 37 thousandths of a second slower than Charlie Robertson in this part of qualifying. Except that changes because Sennan Fielding now further extends the margin at the top of the combined times. He goes 2nd fastest in this session and puts the Audi now 5.5 tenths to the good on combined lap times. Down to 3rd place in this session goes the Ginetta, and Gus Burton, it's an improvement. It wasn't an improvement that time, a 35.4, about 3/4 of a second off his best.
Yeah, we see Mike Simpson in this new entry that we were talking about earlier. That Ginetta brakes so late for that hairpin. I thought he was going straight on, but obviously one of the stalwarts of GT4 Ginetta. I raced the first incarnation in 2008 now, and the first ever British GT4 race, and it has moved on a little bit. Obviously Yorkshire technology isn't particularly at the forefront of any automotive, but Ginetta and Lawrence Thompson do an amazing job to turn out a car that is made and designed in the UK that can go race against your Audis, your BMWs, your McLarens and everything. It's very impressive. It's just difficult to come into a championship midway through a year and be straight on it.
Jamie Stanley is having an absolute mare here. He's just had another 2 lap times disallowed for track limits at first the old hairpin and then the chicane. He's not actually set a lap time in this session yet, Jamie Stanley, and he's had 4 attempts. That is not really a very Jamie Stanley-esque performance, is it? We expect him to at least be able to get a clean lap in. So if they are being lenient on track limits with everyone else, clearly Jamie Stanley not in the good books of the judges of fact down at the old hairpin or the chicane. There he goes, look, across the line. Right, that was a lap time. It wasn't a terribly quick lap time. It was the slowest so far, but Jamie Stanley has at least got through for the time being without having that time deleted.
It was his best lap, I guess.
It was, yes.
Yeah, I mean, Jamie's super professional here, and I wouldn't want to be near him. He's got a fiery temper, so when he finds out, if he hasn't been told already, that he's lost 4 laps, someone who's going up to race control in a proper march and is going to have a word with our race director, Peter Daly, super experienced, and I've generally always got on with him and respect his decisions. Even when he's wrong, I've told him that, and he doesn't agree. But yeah, it's difficult, and it is going to be the hot topic, especially tomorrow in the race. You've got basically 3 lives an hour. Once you get onto your 4th, and you enter a drive-through penalty, which is a strange one as a driver, because you're looking at maybe gaining half a tenth or a tenth when you do it. You're wrong, but that is what you gain. And then suddenly when you do 4 of them, you lose 22 seconds driving through the pit lane. So the risk versus reward is very poor, but when you've got realistically 5 opportunities a lap around Donington, and you're going to be doing in the region of 42 laps in an hour, suddenly all those tenths add up. So that's the defence of a driver of why we're stupid and we get drive-throughs is all marginal gain stuff.
Yes, indeed, spoken like a true professional racing driver. And of course, don't be at all surprised if that does start to have a bearing, switching back to GT3 for a second, on that championship, because all it takes is 1 too many transgressions with track limits and it could destroy your championship hopes. And the same is true of the GT4 Pro-Am title, which still has these 4 or 5 teams in contention. Right, checkered flag is out. A lot of cars are already in the pit lane, and it does look as though it is going to be the stellar Audi of Senna Fielding and Richard Williams, fastest in both sessions. You said that was the easiest way of doing it, go fastest in both sessions and you'll have pole position, and it looks like they will have. That car is also now bailed for the pit lane and is 5.5 tenths quicker than anyone else on those combined times. Within the session, it's Jamie Caroline fastest in the Toyota, and that will be good enough to put Toyota GR Supra GT4 that he shares with John Ferguson onto 5th place on the grid. The last car yet to see the checkered flag is Andrew Gordon-Colebrook in the number 9 Century Motorsport BMW, but he's not setting the timing screens alight. So it looks like it will be an Audi from a McLaren, from a Mustang, from a BMW, from a Toyota, from an Aston Martin. Not bad variety that within GT4, is it? Yeah,
you would argue that the BOP is doing pretty well if you could be in any of the brands of GT4 and be in a chance of being in the top 6. So yeah, really, really good job by the organisers to get it tight, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow's race. I think it's going to be harder. I think Richard Williams was a class act there in his qualifying session. He's obviously going to start the car tomorrow. He was half a second quicker than anyone else there. So it's really up to everyone else overnight to hope to work on a better race car. And they might have the pace over 1 lap, but over a stint, they might be able to sort of bridge the gap to Stella's Audi.
Remember, they were one of many GT4 cars that didn't finish here at Donington Park earlier in the year, so out for redemption, you could say, and they're off to the perfect start in that respect, because Senna Fielding and Richard Williams provisionally will be on pole position for the GT4 element of the Donington decider, ahead of the Alan Vallant and Michael Benyai number 3 Rocket RJN McLaren. The Ford Mustang of Matt Cowley and Will Moore will start 3rd, ahead of the champion-elects Gus Burton and Will Burns in the Century Motorsport BMW M4. Then it's the Toyota, the Supra of Jamie Caroline and John Ferguson will line up 5th, ahead of Darren Turner and Matt Topham, your Pro-Am Championship leaders. They're the 2nd highest placed Pro-Am car on the GT4 grid. Then it is the 2nd BMW of Andrew Gordon-Colebrook and Chris Salkeld, ahead of James Kell and Jordan Collard. So they did not qualify that well. They're only 1 place behind the number 9 car, and remember they are 2nd and 3rd in the GT4 Championship race. Then it's the Century Motorsport Aston Martin, all 3 Century cars getting into the top 9, ahead of Balf Motorsports number 90 McLaren. Assetto's Ginetta will start 11th, ahead of the number 4 Team Rocket RJ and McLaren. The CWS Racing Ginetta G56, the number 78 car, starts 13th, and Fox Motorsport, they did get to keep that final lap in the end, and in fact Jamie Stanley did go on to improve to 12th place in the session, but they will start still at the back of the GT4 grid. So that is qualifying done then here at Donington Park. A 2-hour race still to come, and still more questions than answers, really, Joe, in both GT3 and GT4. The GT3 grid, honestly, couldn't be much more finely poised, could it? You've got the championship leader behind most of their championship rivals. You've got one of their championship rivals on pole position in the shape of the WPI Motorsport car, a car that does have a success penalty. It's going to be a fascinating race, isn't it?
Definitely. I think the important things that I would take from it is you've got a big grenade there in the Enduro McLaren of Tilbrook and Clutton. Super fast, nothing to lose whatsoever. And then the next bit is that the Ram car is in front of both Barwell cars. Yeah. My fear for Ram was if there was one Barwell car in front, didn't really matter which one, they were going to get held up and potentially blocked. Now they're in front, they can get on the front foot and just try and scare Machiski into seeing a gap appear and really, really try and put pressure on Machiski, which we saw kind of happened in quali.
Indeed. Right then, highlights of GT4 qualifying, which has set us up with a fascinating grid. It started off with some pretty exciting driving from the Toyota. In fact, that exciting driving carried on through most of the session, but Jamie Caroline jumping in for that second part of the qualifying session was immediately setting the pace and looked as though he may well be the quickest GT4 driver here at Donington Park. The Academy Ford Mustang is looking pretty strong as well, looking for their second win of the season, but it's the stellar Audi on pole position. A brilliant effort from Senna Fielding and Richard Williams.